Hello and welcome to another episode from Backlot 605. This is our box office. I am your host, Brian Mensing, and joining me as always is my co host, Derrick Veurink. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Brian. You?
Not too bad. It's been kind of a fine weekend, I guess, for the sake of movies and whatnot. Not a whole lot's been going on. We'll go over that a little bit here. Um, yeah, anything that
Yeah.
you can think of so far
Well,
that is going to jump
well,
out at us?
well. I mean, the first thing there's two things I'll preface. The first thing is there are no new entries in the box office top five. It's the same movies as last week, but there's a reason for that, and we're going to get into that because there's something really big and really dark coming our way next week. So the studios are obviously
Ooh.
very scared of that. So more to come on that later.
Something dark. All right.
Mhm.
So yes, let me get that pulled up here. So yes, as you stated here, same as last week here, coming in at number one, we have Uncharted coming at $23.25 million. For drops 47% in its second week, which is like I basically said last week here, we're getting more into back to the usual dips on from week to week and whatnot. So a 47% drop from last week, I'd say is pretty status quo for a movie like this.
Yeah, and we've got an 83 million total after two weekends, which again, very solid for this. I've got to think Sony is very happy with the performance of this movie so far. It's certainly going to coast to 100 million over the course of March. There was some rumblings last weekend from the president of Sony Pictures saying that Uncharted is quote unquote their newest movie franchise. So
hmm
they stopped short of officially announcing, hey, Uncharted 2 is actually happening, but I'm sure they're going to find a way to do it. So,
Yeah, this is one of those ones where I think there would have to be some serious backlash for them not to give Uncharted, at least to give us a green light on Uncharted 2, whether or not when it actually happens. But I agree.
yep.
I think it's just a matter of time,
Yeah. And
at
just
least
fitting it in
publicly.
amongst Tom Holland's busy Spider Man schedule. That's probably the
Eh,
biggest thing, too.
you're absolutely correct because if there's one thing Sony's going to do, it's are we going to give them Uncharted or Spider-Man first? Let me think. Which one's going to give us more bang for our money?
The one thing you should keep in mind, though, is Tom Holland filmed Uncharted before Spider Man No Way Home. Like, he
I
wrapped Uncharted, and then 48 hours later, he was in Atlanta filming Spider Man. So
I
you can definitely tell where Sony's priorities are at in terms of got to get that stuff out sooner.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yep, I did hear about the whole going from Uncharted straight into Spider-Man because I did see a thing where Tom Holland basically was like, it damn near killed him because of the
yes.
extensive action sequences that he needed to do for Uncharted to go into Spider-Man. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, give me something a little bit low key before I go back into either one of these two.
Yep.
All right, coming in number two, Dog, $10.13 million. Um, actually, I'd say this for a movie like this, for Channing Tatum, for the buddy-ish movie as you described it here this last weekend, only taking a 32% drop from week one to week two. I'd say this is a pretty good for a week two for Dog.
Yeah, and I actually did a little bit more of the math because last weekend's number included like not just your 3-day weekend, but it had like Thursday previews, it had Valentine's Day previews. So
hmm
if I took that out of the number, the drop actually went down to like 25, 26%, which
Okay.
again, I think that just goes to show that word of mouth on this movie is doing very well.
hmm
I think, again, people hungry to see Channing Tatum on the screen again, loving the Tatum plus a dog team up. I think this is going to play quite a long time, probably all the way through March and all the way into when his next movie, The Lost City, opens at the very end of March. So
hmm
again, I think this is a really good start to again his comeback year.
Yeah, I mean, come on, you look at that poster. I mean, come on, don't they look cute together? Of course, people are gonna want to go see that.
Yeah,
All right, coming
exactly.
in at number three, Spider-Man. Tom Holland returns again. No Way Home, $5.75 million, only a 23% drop. But again, this is the 11th week we're talking about. Well, technically 12 for us. And it's still obviously going stupid strong.
Yeah, I mean, two things to note. The first thing is, I'm really impressed by this drop of 23%, especially considering that last week, Sony finally made the big social media announcement. Hey, we're coming out on digital on March 22nd. We're coming out on physical media on April 12th. They did the whole thing where they put out that social media post with the three Spider-Man doing the pointing meme and blowing
Mm-hmm.
up the internet with that, specifically to promote those digital and Blu-ray releases. So people know those are coming now. People can prepare. So there's that. Of course, the bigger thing is obviously there is another superhero movie coming out next week, and I think we're really going to finally see. It'll still probably be in the top 5, but I think we're really going to start to see that impact because now we've got some true counter programming competition against it.
Mm, right. Yeah. Um, I'd say next week is going to be very interesting for all of our movies for the respect of how next week is going to go. But I could definitely see like Spider-Man even getting a little bit of help because of next week, and maybe some people turning it into like a double feature kind of day thing. So
Perhaps,
I guess we'll kind of see,
yeah.
depending on how long they want to stay in the theater. Coming in at number 4, Death on the Nile, $4.5 million, 31% drop in week 3. I mean, again, I would honestly say for the sake of, it doesn't look like it's doing so hot, but it's also like you've said, it's one of those ones where Disney's like, we don't know what to do with it. We're just going to chuck it out there so we can get it out there and whatnot. But honestly, I mean, I would say from week 2 to week 3, only taking a 31% drop in the same instance like we said about the 4-day weekend from last week here. Um, I'd say it's pretty good actually.
Yeah, I mean it's doing all right. Again, this is probably out of our entire list. This is the one that's going to appeal to older audiences the most. And again,
Hmm.
they're always some of the slowest audiences to come out, especially as we're kind of getting past this Omicron wave of COVID. So there's that to look forward to. That being said, again, we're only at about 33 million for this movie. And again, Murder on the Orient Express finished just over 100. So again, it has taken a deep dive from you know where its predecessor was, and at this point basically Disney's just trying to run out that 45-day clock so that they can slap this out on HBO Max and Hulu and get it streaming
Hmm.
like all their other stuff that's been dropping this past month or so. So yeah, I mean it's there. Maybe we'll again, because we're only going to have one new movie next weekend, it probably sticks around here in the top 5 next week, but we'll see there too.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, I guess weirder things have happened.
Yes.
All right, coming in at number 5, we have Jackass Forever, $3.18 million, taking a 39% drop from its third to fourth week here. This is that one, honestly, like I could actually picture, just depending on how those numbers run, where Jackass is that kind of movie where it's like it might just hold on to that small little thread and give us that number 5 upset next week.
I mean I'll play the counterpoint here. Jackass Forever is definitely aiming toward that young male demographic that is
Mhm.
definitely going to show up for the Batman next weekend.
Mhm.
So I think, if anything, I think Jackass takes the bigger hit over Death of
True.
the Nile because of that. That's just my speculation right there.
You make a very valid point that I was not thinking about. You're correct. The people that would go see Jackass are the people that would go see Batman.
Yeah, and especially go see it right away. So
Very much so. So yes, being our top 5 for the week, we have got Uncharted coming in at number 1, 23.25 million. Dog comes in at number 2, 10.13. Spider-Man No Way Home comes in at 5.75 million. Death on the Nile, 4.5, comes in at number 4. And rounding out our top 5 is Jackass Forever coming at 3.18 million. So not a real bad, I guess, weekend for nothing really new or anything coming out and whatnot, or at least anything that people are aiming for the theaters to go see and whatnot. So you did reference the fact that we did at least have some stuff to talk about, though. Um,
yeah, so if there was any new activity, it was completely outside of this repeat top 5. So to
mhm.
that end, I put
Yes.
together another slide this week for those movies that are outside the top 5.
Yeah.
And in particular, there are three that I was going to highlight here. The first one was we talked about last week. The biggest new movie that was opening this weekend was the Foo Fighters horror comedy Studio 666, which only mustered up to eighth place with $1.58 million.
hmm
Again, not. I mean, I think it did okay. This is pretty much going to be a niche movie because
Very much.
you're you know the diehard horror fans and the Foo Fighters fan base. Those are the ones that are going to show up. But besides them, there probably wasn't much appeal. So at least they made the effort to get this out into theaters in the first place, which I'm happy about that.
Oh yeah, I mean Studio 666 is the kind of thing where like I could easily have seen the studio just be like, we're just gonna dump it straight to digital or something like that. The fact
Yep.
that it actually even got a theatrical run, honestly, it does surprise me. I didn't get a chance to. My busy was too waking. I mean that this is the one that I wanted to go see for the new releases. I mean, at this point right now, I kind of would rather go see that than go see Uncharted, and that's kind of a scary thing to say. But that's because you know what? I like the Foo Fighters. I enjoy a horror comedy when it's done correctly and whatnot. So for me, like this is right up my alley.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I went to see this right away Thursday night because I was just really curious what this movie was going to be. I mean,
hmm
the Foo Fighters, they don't. I mean, Dave Grohl has made cameos in movies, but and he has directed stuff like the second best movie of the 2010s, Studio City. But I was just really curious what this movie was going to be, and it is just a very goofy horror comedy
hmm
with a lot of gore. The Foo Fighters, yeah, they're not necessarily great actors, but I think Dave Grohl is really trying hard to kind of sell this hybrid horror comedy about it. I've heard some comparisons to like Scooby Doo type vibes with it, which I think in retrospect makes a lot of sense. So, but it's just really fun. It's got some cool cameos. Again, some very gory, geyser blood filled kills.
that
It's
just
worth the
sounds fun.
watch.
That just
So,
sounds fun.
exactly. The other two I want to highlight real quick. We talked about Cyrano, the Peter
hmm
Dinklage musical, last week. That opened at number 9 with 1.40 million. Again, this is just kind of trying to get that. This is kind of like that last major Oscar release to come out in theaters. It didn't really get very far. I think it only opened in like 140 cities from what I read this morning, of which Sioux Falls was one of those. But again, it only had one Oscar nomination for Best Costume Design, so that probably wasn't enough, or at least the studio was hoping that they would have more momentum for that.
hmm
So, but again, it's another title aimed at older adult audiences, so it'll make a little bit of money, but not too much.
Yeah, which is kind of. I mean, I'm intrigued by that movie, but I could certainly see where it's not the kind of movie that people are going to go in droves to go see and whatnot. So, it is kind of it for the sake of like Peter Dinklage, it's kind of it sucks that it only came in at ninth, but at the same time too, in the same vein of like Studio 666, it's a
Yeah,
little bit of a niche. Not a lot of people are into like the time period movies, musicals, like you've
yep,
said. So like I could certainly see why it landed where it did though too.
yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to know, which was just outside the top 10, but I thought was very interesting, a little movie called The Godfather
hmm
came back to theaters this weekend because next month the movie is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and they're doing a lot of hullabaloo and celebration for it. It's going to come out on 4K Blu-ray in a trilogy box set near the end of March. And so, because this weekend was kind of sparse, they decided that they were going to re-release that new 4K version of the movie in Dolby Cinema premium theaters across the nation. And of course, I ignored it because we don't have a Dolby Cinema around here. The
Yeah.
closest one is in the Twin Cities, but that was still good enough to make $900,000 at the box office, which I think is pretty darn good for a
hmm
movie, absolute classic like that. And glad to see stuff like that get a nice premium re-release nationwide these days.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly say, I mean, for a 50-year-old movie that anybody who's going to go see The Godfather probably either owns it or has seen it multiple times, kind of thing
Yep.
and whatnot. But to be able to garner that kind of a return on a movie that is 50 years old, I think speaks volumes to the movie itself. Plus, at the same time, too, when we're getting slides ready, I was like, holy crap, this movie is 50 years old.
It is. Yep. It absolutely is.
All right, here. And then lastly, here, what we have for next weekend, what you've alluded to here is what is going to shake up the top five is the Batman, the Robert Pattinson led. Are we going to see the rise and fall of a quick Batman? Are we going to get a good long? How do you how do you see the Batman doing for next weekend?
Yeah. So obviously, we've kind of been in a bit of a blockbuster drought since Spider-Man No Way Home.
Hmm.
There's stuff that's scuttled around, like, Morbius supposed to come out in January and kind of take that post Spidey hype. But they moved that out to April 1st. So there's been a lot of eyes on the Batman trying to be, the next mega blockbuster in the comic book space. So the weekend number we're going to discuss next week is actually pretty loaded because, for starters, IMAX theaters are going to have the very first preview of the movie on Tuesday night. So they'll get one Tuesday night showing before its regular release. Then on Wednesday, other large format non IMAX theaters across the nation are going to do their preview showing of it. And then at 3 p.m. on Thursday, that's when regular previews are going to start in all theaters nationwide. So those 3 days plus Friday and Saturday and Sunday are going to combine to give us our weekend number that we're going to discuss at the top of the show next week. And we'll
Hmm.
probably do some breakdowns in terms of, like, what was what, if we have that information. So
Sure.
there's that. So just to give a little bit more explanation on, because usually when we talk about an opening weekend, it's usually Thursday previews plus Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But obviously, it's got more nights to shine here, and you definitely know if people have an opportunity to check this out early, they will. So there's that. Um, there's also the question of, like, this Batman movie is like 5 minutes short of the 3 hour mark. In theaters, this is the longest Batman movie ever because the previous entry was The Dark Knight Rises. That was 165. So there's been a
Wow.
little bit of concern about, you know, is that going to hurt the Batman? Which, honestly, I don't think so, because we had a little bit of that discussion with Spider-Man No Way Home, which is a full 2.5 hours,
Hmm.
and obviously that didn't hurt. Obviously, with a movie like Avengers Endgame, which actually just notched right above 3 hours in running time and had the biggest opening weekend of all time, there's that too. So I don't think it's going to hurt that much. And in all honesty, like we saw with Endgame, like we saw with No Way Home, you know, theaters will schedule this movie on as many screens as they need as long as there's the demand,
Hmm.
especially when the other stuff isn't doing super huge, super hot, as we saw. So I think we're going to be fine there. So what I'm going to say here for my prediction, just to kind of get this off the bat, is I'm hoping that we can get to the 150 million mark by this time next week. I think that's pretty much doable. It's kind of like the only big new game in town. The anticipation of seeing, Robert Pattinson do what he has to do, seeing the cadre of villains like the Penguin and the Riddler and the Catwoman and all that stuff. I think it will do decently again. Spider-Man No Way Home did 260 million, but that's a much more family friendly, and of course that had so much hype because of everybody that was coming back. So the Batman isn't going to do as well as that, but I think it's going to have a pretty darn good start nonetheless.
I would definitely agree. Yeah, you made the mention about whether or not the runtime would hinder the movie, and the first thing I thought was, no, the theaters are going to put it on as many screens as possible. If it's going to hinder anybody, it's going to be the other movies that are out during the same time as this here because they're going to
Yep,
get less screen time. So
correct.
I completely see that as being that. 150, I think, is a very easily attractive number. Though this may not be as family friendly as, like, say, Spider-Man No Way Home,
Oh,
I do
absolutely
think
not.
it still holds that possibility of getting to maybe somewhat near that, just because like you said, because of the large format previews and stuff like that that we're getting and whatnot. Um, I do think it does hold a possibility, but I guess we will certainly see.
Yeah, I mean, with the family thing, I could certainly see, kids maybe getting antsy in their seats because it might be a little bit more slow going. I've heard the vibes. This is more of kind of like a film noir slash, like procedural vibe to this
Hmm.
movie. Which, you know, isn't necessarily going to be bad for families in the way that, say, like Batman Returns traumatized kids 30 years ago. That's not going to happen here.
Right.
But, it certainly, I'm sure there will still be some families that show up and some kids might get like, is this going to end? Perhaps we'll see what happens there. I know the review embargo. Well, actually, we're recording this Sunday night. I know the embargo is dropping like sometime Monday morning for reviews, so we'll really start to get that picture of what it is. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the Batman. It's it's to DC what Spider-Man is to Marvel in terms of like their biggest superhero in the
Hmm.
cadre. So I think the sky's the limit, but that's what we'll talk about next week.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I would certainly say too is it definitely darker, no pun intended, than Spider-Man. I
Yep.
absolutely. But I think the advantage they have is that they've positioned this thing as a PG-13. Even though
Yep.
I would say an R-rated one would be very interesting to see because I think DC has been pulling that off very well in comparison. But I think the PG-13 will also help as well.
Yeah, I never had any doubt that the Batman would always have been a PG-13 movie. They certainly wouldn't want to give up that much money, especially in the wake of, say, the Suicide Squad getting that R rating and definitely not doing as well as its predecessor. But that was a completely different situation that
Hmm.
we'll talk about in this week's bonus episode to
Yeah.
an extent.
Absolutely, yeah. I know that is one thing I also did think of here is that aspect of it. But I agree. I think the Suicide Squad definitely hinders from other aspects and not
Yes.
because it's an R-rated movie. So yes, that has been our box office for this week. Be sure to check us out every week as we discuss what is going on in the box office and how things are going. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterbox HQ, where you can follow us all at Backlot 605. On Facebook, we also have the South Dakota Film Community Group. You can sure to film lovers, film movie enthusiasts, just everybody likes talking about movies. So join the conversation. If you like hearing about the different movies that we are discussing on a week to week, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, YouTube, and check out our pretty faces on YouTube. Um, excuse me. If you want to support the show, be sure to check us out on Patreon. Get those bonus episodes. That is patreon.com/. Backlot 605. What additional fun stuff can we give the crowd there, Derek?
Yeah. So, first off, tomorrow's bonus episode will be covering the folks that, or the person that you guys have been covering on the podcast this past month, which is Viola Davis, looking at her career at the box office, which has had some really interesting nooks and crannies. So, we'll get into that. Also, on the actual main podcast, you guys are starting Batman month with a review of 1966's Batman the movie starring Adam West. I've seen the letterbox ratings from you guys earlier today, and that's going to be a
It's
very interesting discussion.
it's going to be a very very interesting conversation. I purposely have not put mine on there, but I have seen Casey's, I have seen Sam's, and it is going to be a very interesting conversation. And I'm very curious as to see how our guest is also going to be leaning with that movie as well.
Exactly. And then finally, your guys' next Patreon episode, because you're also doing all Batman episodes on that feed, will be an episode on the aforementioned Matt Reeves's The Batman. So once
Hmm.
you guys have seen that, look for that sometime in the next week or so.
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to the Wednesday fan preview, so
Cool.
we will have lots of discuss in regards to that one as well.
Yay.
Um, so with all that here, enjoy your guys' week. We will check you out tomorrow on the bonus episode, and we will say goodbye.
Later.